Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a video about Iron Maiden. Now, Iron Maiden is one of the first bands that immediately come to mind when I think of essential metal bands. So for this video, we're going to be going over the worst song from each album from Iron Maiden. I really like doing these types of videos because it is a little bit challenging. I kind of like the concept of these types of videos. I've done a few like this before, so if you haven't seen those, feel free to go check those out. So yeah, we're going to go over the Iron Maiden discography and let you guys know, in my opinion, what is the weakest song from each album. Now, this is just my opinion, of course. If your favorites happen to be the ones that I've chosen, that's totally fine. As a matter of fact, when it comes to these first few Iron Maiden albums, there's not really a lot of weak material on them. So there's really no wrong answer here when it comes to the early days of Iron Maiden, because in the early days of Iron Maiden, this band was just on top of the world, it seems like. I mean, that was just the case. And keep in mind, with these types of videos, I'm not going to be choosing instrumentals or interludes. Now, let's say there is a case where an interlude or an instrumental does happen to be my least favorite. I'm not going to pick it simply because I just think that's just kind of unfair. I kind of find that like a cheap excuse in a way to pick as a least favorite in some circumstances, I guess. And it's not as challenging as well. So that's why I'm going to pick actual songs with vocals and everything. So let's go ahead and get started. And of course, we start with the debut album, Iron Maiden. And there's not really a weak moment on this album. I like pretty much everything off this album. But if you had to make me choose a least favorite, I would go with Sanctuary. Not a bad song. It's not. It's not a bad song, but it is easily my least favorite on the album. It just is the song that I return to the least from this album. It's not as interesting as the other songs on this album. Not a bad song, though, but it's got to be my least favorite. So, Sanctuary. Next, we got Killers, and this one is kind of tough. Like with the debut, there's not a weak moment on this album. I mean, it really does go to show how strong the Paul Di'Anno era was. But with this one, as much as it hurts me to say, I'd go with Another Life. Probably my least favorite on the album. It's not bad. As a matter of fact, it's not bad at all. It's actually a pretty good song. I mean, it's got some catchy riffs and everything, but it's just not as interesting as the other songs on this album. So, Another Life. Next, we got The Number of the Beast, of course, one of Iron Maiden's biggest albums. Now, this one is kind of simple for me. I'd go with Gangland. This song has never really interested me much. There's nothing that special about it. I've never been crazy about this one, and I think it's easily the weakest song on the album. I've actually seen some people say that Invaders is the worst song on the album, which, while I don't agree with, I can understand, but I personally like it more than Gangland. I mean, that's for certain, but Gangland's got to be my pick. All right, next, we got Peace of Mind. Now, this is probably the toughest one yet because, I mean, there's not a single weak song on this album. I mean, there really isn't. But if you had to make me choose, obviously, I would choose one of the songs in the second half. This is one of those albums, like with many albums, where the first half is just stronger than the second half. But I would go with Still Life as the worst song on the album, even though it's not bad. It's not a bad song, but I have to go with it as my least favorite. So, Still Life. Next, Powerslave, which is, of course, one of their best, and there's not a single weak song on this album. I like pretty much everything from this album, but my least favorite, choosing a least favorite is kind of easy. Back in the Village. I know this is a lot of people's least favorites. For understandable reasons, it's just not as interesting as the other songs. It kind of pales in comparison to the other songs off the album. It's a very good song, but it is probably the worst song on the album. So Back in the Village. Next, Somewhere in Time. Now, this one's also kind of tough because, well, there's not really a weak moment on this album either. I mean, again, the 1980s era of Iron Maiden is just very, very strong. But if I had to go with the least favorite, as much as it hurts me to say, and even though this might be a controversial pick, I would actually go with one of the singles, Wasted Years. I know that might sound rather surprising, but I think my main gripe with that song is it's not as complex or musically interesting as the other songs. I mean, it is a more straightforward track that is pretty accessible, pretty mainstream sounding, which is not a bad thing. Once again, there's not a bad song on here. That includes Wasted Years. It's a good song, but to me, it's just not as good as the other songs on the album. Now, I feel like some people actually might have chosen Sea of Madness or maybe even Deja Vu as the weakest track on the album, but I actually really like those songs, especially Sea of Madness, which I think is pretty underrated. But for the worst, I gotta go with Wasted Years. Next, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which is another one of their best, and it's maybe my favorite Iron Maiden album. So with that being said, there's not a single weak song on here. But if you had to make me choose The Prophecy, I would probably go with The Prophecy as the weakest. Now, that's a very good track. It's a very solid track, but it's just not as interesting as the other songs, in my opinion anyway. I mean, there's not much to say about it because every song on here is excellent, so I can't make much complaints with that song, but again, the only thing I can really say is it's just not as good or as interesting as the other songs, so I gotta go with The Prophecy. Next, we got No Prayer for the Dying, and yeah, kind of a controversial album. There's some people that really don't like this album. I think it's an okay album, but for my least favorites, it would definitely be one of the songs in the second half. I would probably go with Hooks in You. I don't really remember this song much, so that's one of the reasons why I gotta go with it. It's just not as memorable or as captivating to listen to as some of the other songs. Now, there is some good songs on here. I mean, it's not one of their best albums, but there's a few good songs on here, but Hooks in You's gotta be my pick for the worst on the album. Next, Fear of the Dark, and in my opinion, kind of an underrated album. It is one of their darker sounding albums, and I like this album. It's not one of their best or anything, but I do like it. Now, for my least favorite, this one is rather simple. Weekend Warrior. I don't know what it is about this song, but it's just not nearly as good as some of the other songs on the album. I mean, it barely even sounds like an Iron Maiden song. I'm just not too impressed with the overall presentation of this song. I mean, it's okay. It's an okay song, but it's got to be my pick for the weakest track on the album. So Weekend Warrior. Next, The X Factor. Now, this is an album that I know some people don't like as well. I personally dig the album, though. I like this one. This is another one of their darker sounding albums. Probably is their darkest sounding album. I know one of the members, I can't remember which member, I want to say it was Steve Harris, that was going through a tough time during the making of this album. I think it turned out well, though. I think this album turned out pretty good. But as my least favorite, I'd go with Fortunes of War, which I know might sound rather surprising to some people because weirdly, I've been seeing some people say that this is one of the better songs off the album, which I mean, I'm not going to argue with that opinion because it's not a bad song, but there's just a few things about it that I'm not that crazy about. It's not as good as the other songs off the album. I'm just not too crazy about the way Blaze Bayley delivers the line Fortunes of War, like Fortunes of War. I mean, and the whole instrumentation in the background that just, it sounds so bland to me. I don't know what it is about it, but not that crazy about it. But it's not bad, though. I will say that. So, Fortunes of War. Next, Virtual 11. You already know my pick. Don't you think this is the worst Iron Maiden song? That's right, The Angel and the Gambler. It's the worst Iron Maiden song ever. Not just from this album, but ever. It's repetitive, and Blaze Bayley's vocal delivery, not that well. I mean, it's got to be the worst Iron Maiden song, so The Angel and the Gambler. Next, we got Brave New World. This one is really tough because, boy, there's not a single weak song on here either. But if you had to make me choose, The Nomad. Not a bad song at all. Very good song, as a matter of fact. But if you had to make me choose a least favorite, if you just had to make me choose, I would go with The Nomad. I mean, there's not much wrong with it. It's just not as good as the other songs, in my opinion. So next, Dance of Death. Kind of another underrated album from these guys. I do like this album. I know some people don't really like it as much, but I like the album. But if I had to go with my least favorites or the weakest song off the album, I would probably go with New Frontier. It's not terrible, but it's not anything special either. And it's not that memorable. I mean, that's all I can really say about it. So New Frontier, that's my least favorite from Dance of Death. Okay, next, A Matter of Life and Death. This one is rather difficult. It's not one of their best albums, but I mean, it's got some good stuff on here. But I would say that my least favorite would be Out of the Shadows. Now, believe it or not, there was a time where I actually really loved this song. I mean, to say that it used to be one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs, I don't know what it is about this one. I think it was just the melodies and the presentation of the song and just how the song flowed. But now I actually don't really like this song that much anymore. I mean, I'm actually not crazy about the way Bruce is delivering the lyrics in this song. I mean, he doesn't really sound like he's giving it his all in this song. I mean, it sounds kind of, I'm not sure how to describe it, but it's kind of boring, I guess. So Out of the Shadows, it's got to be my least favorite from that album. Next, we got The Final Frontier, and with this album, I have quite a few least favorites, because this album is one of their weakest, in my opinion. I know that might be a rather unpopular opinion, but it is what it is. However, if I had to choose a least favorite, Starblind. This song just musically doesn't go anywhere. I remember listening to this song and thinking, wow, this song is so bland, boring, and it just doesn't go anywhere musically. I've seen some people say that this is a favorite off the album, which, I mean, hey, that's your opinion, but I personally don't see it. I'm sorry, I just don't see it. So Starblind. Finally, the latest Iron Maiden album, The Book of Souls. This one is rather tough because this is a pretty good album, but it's just too long of an album. I mean, this is kind of an overhyped album, I'd say. If I had to choose a least favorite, I would probably go with The Great Unknown. Now, like with Out of the Shadows from A Matter of Life and Death, The Great Unknown is actually a song that I used to like. But this song just musically, like with Starblind, just doesn't really go anywhere, and it's kind of boring, I guess. Now, the introduction is kind of unique. I like the dark vibe of the introduction, but the song just musically doesn't go anywhere. That's my main problem with it. So my pick for The Book of Souls, The Great Unknown. Well, there you have it, guys. Those are my picks for the worst Iron Maiden songs from each album. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with my picks? Let me know what you think. What are the worst Iron Maiden songs from each album in your opinion? Feel free to let me know in the comments. So on that note, thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.